We have a lot of news to cover in today's video. It looks like the NHLPA is zeroing in on its new executive director. The new leader should be announced here in the coming days. We have a big signing with the Buffalo Sabres and Dylan Cozens. We have some more trade talk around the San Jose Sharks, the Vancouver Canucks, as well as Jacob Chychrun. Leaf fans are in a dizzy thinking he's heading to Toronto. We'll discuss why and if it could happen coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and some trade rumors to take a look at here today. Before we jump into all that, I just want to take another look back at NHL history on this day, February the 7th, all the way back 47 years ago in 1976. Was a pretty significant day in NHL history where Toronto Maple Leafs forward Daryl Sittler put up a 10-point game. So obviously that was one of the most historic individual performances in NHL history. Something that you never see today. Usually even a 4 or 5 point game is pretty crazy. It's rare that you get above that. So certainly one of the more bigger individual performances in recent modern NHL history. One little quick tidbit from that as well. Apparently his pregame meal before that game, he had himself some Swiss chalets. So for Canadians who are familiar with that restaurant chain, if you like some rotisserie chicken, if you're an NHL player, maybe you should consider that as well. It might bring you some good pregame luck to have one heck of a performance. Now, as I mentioned, we have a massive signing in Buffalo. We just got the news not too long ago that the Sabres have agreed to terms with forward Dylan Cozens. He gets a 7-year contract extension with an average annual value of $7.1 million, total value being $49.7 million. Of course, Dylan Cozens, a high pick from a few years back, has progressed well in his development. He's becoming a big part of the Sabres group. Not quite on pace for a point-per-game status this year, but he's not too far off the mark, and it wouldn't be shocking by the end of the year if he gets to that. I'm going to say he's going to end up with somewhere between 70 and 80 points is the most likely scenario, assuming that he stays healthy and continues at the same pace, of course. But he's becoming a big part of that core group of young players that they're building around. I think it's fair to say that Kevin Adams and the Sabres caught a lot of us off guard with the big Tage Thompson contract last year when he signed him. And obviously, that's worked out quite nicely. Thompson's really continuing to blossom and being a top center, which, starting last year, he kind of came out of nowhere. Kind of caught a lot of people off guard with that major step forward, that major development piece. Cozens, on the other hand, had a steady, getting there, which that's not so surprising that he is where he is. But he's had a good young career in junior, had a chance to play international hockey, the World Juniors for Team Canada, been a big part of the Sabres. So this is just another piece locking up the big core of the future for the Sabres. They've signed Matthias Samuelsson long-term. Of course, they got Thompson, Dahlin, you got Cozens now. They're slowly kind of building a nice group of there to be a big part of the Sabres for a long time. So personally, I like the contract. I don't think it's going to be really much risk involved at all if he continues the way he's going. This contract should easily be a bargain in the very near future, as early as even possibly next year or not long after. So that's a great contract for both sides. Nice to see him get locked up long term. As I mentioned as well, the NHLPA appears to be getting really close to having a new leader in the form of a new executive director to replace Donald Fair, who's been at the helm since 2010. So obviously that's a long time. It's 13 years. It was never expected that Fair would remain on that long. But current U.S. Secretary of Law, Muriel Walsh, who we discussed in a prior video as being one of the rumored leading contenders, appears to be the guy who's going to get that role and be installed as a new executive director of the NHLPA, possibly as early as late this week. We don't know exactly when the vote's going to be going down, but NHL insider Ferg Zaravalli has been able to get information suggesting that this is indeed going to happen, and that a vote and an announcement could come, like I said, likely by Friday. It's hard to say the exact day everything gets announced, but certainly not shocking. First, Murray Walsh expected to step down from his government role in the coming days. It looks believed he's going to be waiting here until after the President Joe Biden has his, I believe he's doing an addressing the nation here soon, and after that he'll step down and then we get announced into this new role shortly thereafter. Of course, he does have a background dealing in the union world, so he's well equipped to be in this kind of role. Great experience, great background. We had talked before as well, based on the speculation that the PA wasn't necessarily concerned if their new leader had a history in the game of hockey. It was more about the negotiations and dealing with unions, and that background that was that much more important than it was on exactly which industry they dealt with. So we'll see when this gets announced and how much of a, hopefully improvement for their sake that it'll be. I know that over the years it's tough, balancing act between the players and the NHL owners, and not sure if this is going to help relations, make the next CBA negotiation more complicated. I just hope we don't see any more labor stoppages. We don't need to see any lockouts or strikes. That would be hopefully avoidable, and we can move forward here as the game is in a good place, and another setback like that could be majorly catastrophic. So hopefully that never happens, but hard to say. There is reports and concern that Canucks president Jim Rutherford might already want out of Vancouver, might be having regrets taking that job. Various NHL media out of Vancouver have been mentioning this lately with whispers and suggestions that Rutherford is considering resigning. I'm not sure exactly that it's going to happen that way. I know dealing with ownership there, from what we've seen in the past and heard through Vancouver media, appears to be challenging on its good days. Obviously, Rutherford has surrounded himself with lots of former Penguin people that he's worked with in the past, of course, with Patrick Albine and Rick Tocchet, etc. So it's hard to say if he sticks it out or not, but the fact that he hasn't been on the job all that long, it's certainly not good news. But I don't think Rutherford ever envisioned the job being as big of a surgery to the roster to make this team a contender. And at the same time, I don't think he ever envisioned it being this stressful, especially after everything, how it played out with Bruce Boudreau. But like I said before, I really think Jim Rutherford kind of brought all of that on himself. He could have went about things entirely different and made that, a little quieter, less eventful to the media, and didn't really have to go out of his way to bash Boudreau publicly like he did. Certainly, I think that it was surprising to see the owner appoint a head coach before he brought in somebody to lead the team as a GM or president. That quite often spells recipe for disaster. We knew there was a risk there that whoever was brought in as the GM after the fact might want their own people in there, their own guy. That happens a lot. But obviously, we didn't expect things to go down the way they did. It'd be interesting to see on a longer-term basis if Jim Rutherford sticks things out or if he ends up leaving, if these rumors end up being true to the point that he just doesn't want to be involved anymore. But we'll have to wait and see on that front. When it comes to Dylan Larkin, there's the latest on the contract situation. Of course, the All-Star festivities always leads to some new rumors and speculation about players jumping ship, changing teams, etc., based on who they play with at the All-Star game, who you see them chumming around with, or new line mates or whatnot. Of course, there was Larkin talked about playing with Mitch Marner as being a highlight of his All-Star festivities and whatnot, and it would kind of drum up some speculation. I don't see Dylan Larkin going to the Leafs, but that's a whole other story. But essentially, the belief now is that the Bo Horvat signing in New York or Long Island, which the Islanders are certainly going to impact Larkin's contract, there's no doubt. But it's believed now from Frank Zaravalli, Dave Pagnotta of the fourth period, and a few other insiders mentioning that his number that he's looking for is believed to be around $9 million. We've seen Horvat get $8.5 million. That will certainly be an impact. Might, if anything, give Detroit a little leeway to continue working on that, bringing that number down. But we know Steve Yzerman tends to be the slow type to grind it out, and he's not going to budge on what he feels is fair market value. We've seen him play the long game with Steven Stamkos before, back in 2016 when they were in Tampa. Of course, it came really close, right down to the wire. Real hard, legit shot that Stamkos was leaving Tampa, and they got the contract done right at the 11th hour. Obviously, it never happened. He never left, but it was close, and there was no guarantee that he stayed. I don't know if the Yzerman regime now in Detroit is going to want to take the same approach with Larkin. Will they not trade him and take their chances going into the offseason with him unsigned? I mean, they might. But it's really hard to say. Elliot Friedman on the 32 Thoughts podcast indicated he firmly believes, and I agree with him, that Dylan Larkin wants to be a Red Wing and wants to get this contract done. But at the same time, I think every player wants fair market value, wants to get paid appropriately. And if they're not, some guys are going to be willing to take a discount to stay and remain with the team that they're with and want to stay with. But they can only give so much before they think it's unreasonable and sometimes end up leaving. So it'll be interesting to see if Larkin and Yzerman can come to terms. So we're not saying that Larkin's going to be traded at the deadline if he's not signed, but you have to think that Yzerman is not real keen on the fact of going into the offseason with him unsigned, the possibility of losing him for nothing. So we'll have to wait and be seen. But it still seems like, from what we can tell, from what the NHL insiders are saying, there's still a big gap between negotiations here. And certainly that's not good news. And we'll see if they can bridge that gap before the deadline. And we don't know how Chychrun is going to go here, but we know he's pretty stubborn and got his ways. He got his number he wants to pay Larkin, and if he's not willing to accept, we might unregrettably see him leave the organization. But I don't think either side wants that right now. But we'll have to see how it plays out. San Jose Sharks forward Kevin Labanc, again in the NHL trade rumor mill, again as a healthy scratch. Not going to be in the lineup for the Sharks this evening when they play the Pittsburgh Penguins. Labanc just doesn't seem to fit the style of game that David Quinn, head coach, wants to play. And he hasn't had a terrible season, but he hasn't had a great season either, I think it's fair to say. Again, the Sharks are a team to watch as they get closer to the deadline. There's going to be multiple players there likely get moved. There's been some rumblings of teams being interested in James Reimer. Of course, Erik Karlsson's name is out there for sure, but that's a bigger, more complicated trade. I don't know that we'll see that one right away. There could be something in the summer, perhaps. Otherwise, even a guy like Barabanov as well, another guy getting some attention. Obviously, Timo Meier, a big name in San Jose that, heavily rumored to be on the move because of that $10 million qualifying offer. Hard to say where Meier ends up, but Labanc's another one just not fitting in there. And I think it's time to move on, but his contract could complicate things as well, and it may not result in a trade as quickly as he or the team may like. Now, the Vancouver Canucks as well, back to them here on Thatcher Demko. I mean, we know that there's going to be other moves out of Vancouver. We know Brock Besser is likely. We know Luke Schen's likely. What are the odds on Demko? Vancouver media seems to think that it's possible, decent, but maybe not as likely as guys like Besser or Schenn, or maybe even Connor Garland, for example. However, NHL insiders are reporting now that at least 4 or 5 teams have contacted the Canucks on Thatcher Demko, and they're not being told that they're not interested. They're having negotiations and talking trade, and are willing to listen on just about anything based on Demko being available. We had heard his name from Elliotte Friedman before as a name to watch, thinking that it's possible that it could be dealt. It's going to take a bigger package for them to be really wowed to the point that they would be, closer and interested in pulling the trigger here. But certainly the fact that teams are not being shied away indicates they're absolutely willing to do it for the right price. Now, a lot of people think that the Canucks need to be very careful here, given the fact that they don't have that next goaltending prospect in the system who could possibly be here next Thatcher Demko. And he's not overly old, and if they trade him, if they're able to retool in a year or two and turn this team around, they're not going to have that elite level goaltender, and it might be really difficult to find that replacement who could be at that level down the road. So it's certainly a slippery slope for sure. It's difficult to say what happens on Demko. A lot of that is going to boil down to what the trade offers look like. That much we can say for certain. But the fact that they're having conversations and entertaining the negotiations tells you that they are serious about doing it if the right offer is indeed there. Now, lastly, I want to talk about Jakob Chychrun. It seems like he's gotten the Maple Leaf fan base up in a stir here. It's got the fan base and Toronto media talking about it here, about a potential Chychrun to Maple Leafs trade. Now, here's kind of what got everything going. It's kind of silly in my opinion, but here's kind of what went down. Now, of course, we noticed that on Instagram, Jakob Chychrun recently posted a picture wearing the Drew sweater that is, of course, part of Justin Bieber's clothing line. So, of course, Justin Bieber, Drew, Toronto connection. He also no longer has anything mentioned in his bio that he's a member of the Arizona Coyotes. He's removed reference from them. He's also recently started following a bunch of Toronto media and players, including Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, Ty Domi, of course, longtime Maple Leaf legend, his kids live in the area, and Nick Kypreos, all being recent follows for the account that belongs to Chychrun here. You throw that in with the fact that the Coyotes aren't mentioned in his bio anymore. You get a picture wearing a Justin Bieber sweater, and all of a sudden it's got everybody talking that maybe he's heading to Toronto. We know what he wants out of Arizona. That's no secret. Now, this picture that he was posted here wearing the sweater, he's definitely in Arizona. You can tell with the background that it's not like he was in Toronto. He was in Arizona. But really, Austin Matthews spends time in Arizona on his downtime. Who's to say he couldn't have went there as well when he had some time off, because he does right now. The two very well may already know each other. They very well may already have a relationship. Who's to say that there's not some kind of connection in that regard? I don't know. I think it's a little early and premature to say that this is going to, result in any kind of a trade. Could it? I guess anything is possible. Ever since the Jake Muzzin injury in Toronto, there's been some talk and speculation that they might go after a physical style defenseman. And of course, Chychrun is a physical style defenseman, but it comes with a lot more offense than Jake Muzzin. Listen to a recent edition of the Steve Dangle podcast on SDPN. They were talking about this and wondering what it means, and they all seem to be in favor of a Chychrun trade to the Leafs, even if it meant giving up Morgan Reilly. Now, of course, I don't think the Coyotes are interested in Morgan Reilly. They want younger talent than that. I mean, Reilly's a great player, great defenseman for sure, and a lot of other teams probably would have interest there. But I don't think he's the kind of player that the Coyotes want. But they mentioned moving Reilly in order to save cap space because of bringing Chychrun in. And realistically, they looked at the fact that it's likely going to cost Rasmus Sandin a first-round pick and probably a top prospect, whether it be Nick Robertson, Matthew Knies, or one of those players. And for the most part, those guys seemed in favor of doing a trade. I know if you listen to Craig Button and Steve Cooley's on their podcast as well, Craig Button believes that Kyle Dubas absolutely needs to act and needs to do whatever he can to make sure they have the manpower to get through teams like Tampa and Boston this year's playoffs. I once again reciting the fact that Matthews' contract is going to need to be renegotiated next offseason, and if another early first-round exit could really have an impact on his long-term future in Toronto, and they don't need to worry about the future. They need to worry about today and making sure that they're well-positioned as possible to win the Stanley Cup or go deep in the playoffs at the very least. He also recited back Kyle Dubas' end-of-season press conference where he's once again said that he believes in those core four players being Matthews, Marner, Nylander, and Tavares. Of course, you can throw Reilly in there as the fifth as well. And if you really do believe in those players, he said, then you need to give them all the ammunition and additions they need to be successful. And Chychrun, or another big name, could very well be that guy. Now, Button never went on to talk with Chychrun. He wasn't speaking about anything specific there, just that they need to make additions and go forward this year as it's such a pivotal year. So does the Chychrun to Maple Leafs trade make sense to you? For starters, if you're a Leaf fan, would you be willing to give up Sandin, a first, and a top prospect? That's the asking price right now. Do you do that? Do you go forward? Is he the player they need? So I'd like to know your thoughts on that one. Or do they focus more on the forward group and go in a different direction? I mean, we've heard some rumblings about some of the top forwards and the potential trade market maybe being on their radar too. Be curious to see which way you think they should go. But if you're Toronto and Kyle Dubas and you have this offer for Jacob Chychrun, do you pull the trigger? Do you think the social media stuff has anything to do with a potential linkage to a Maple Leafs trade? I personally don't think that's the case at all. I think it is remotely possible that they could possibly work out a deal. I wouldn't be shocked if they were one of the teams in the mix. I don't know if they want to pay that kind of price tag though, so I don't think that the trade myself is very likely. But then again, stranger things have happened, and the Leafs do need to make a move to go forward this year. I do firmly believe that. But is this the one that they do? I'm not so sure. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.